To the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now 9:15 p.m. in, yes, a very cold, snowy, icy, miserable Budapest. And when I say it's miserable, no one has seen the sun here really for, I guess, about 2 months. I think it's probably about 2 months ago since anybody last saw the sun. So it's very um, kind of dismal here. So here's a question. Ahmadovich says, George, do you think the Epstein will be the new host for the MSM? They're trying to connect it to Putin. Every time I say their media is law, they always surprise us with even lower morality. No, I think it's very interesting. I kind of wanted to start off with the news that Peter Mandelson has resigned from the House of Lords, and while I obviously hold no brief for Mandelson or for Blairism. He kind of invented the whole phenomenon of Blairism, the third way, the kind of centrist social democracy revival, kind of neoliberal, all of the stuff that you associate with Blairism. And Mandelson was really the intellectual godfather of all of that. And I have to also note his remarkable um, tenacity. Remember, he was forced to resign twice um, while he was in government, and then, strangely enough, Keir Starmer decided to select him as the UK ambassador to the United States. Somehow he thought that he would be able to get on with Donald Trump. And it says, hi from Nevada. Oh, it's good to see people from Nevada. It's good to see. I mean, it's kind of rather early for you, nine. So it's about, it's only noon there, so that's good. And but it wasn't a bad decision on the part of Starmer, because Mandelson is actually very smooth and managed to ingratiate himself quite effectively with Trump. And then he's been, he was caught up with the Epstein thing, which was always known. His friendship with Jeffrey Epstein was no secret. So now, he was forced to resign as ambassador to the U.S. Again, he didn't want to resign, but he was forced to resign by Starmer, who, as I say, knew perfectly well, even before he appointed him as the ambassador, that he had been associated with Jeffrey Epstein. And now, with the latest news, Starmer, thundered that he will pass legislation stripping Mandelson of his peerage. And then, rather than have the humiliation, which is always very strange how, because that's in the United States, that's known as the Bill of Attainder. You can't really pass legislation that's directed at one person only, but you can do that in the UK. And he, but so in anticipation of this legislation, which would undoubtedly have passed with a easy majority, Mandelson stepped aside. Now, the this news that Mandelson somehow passed on information to Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know exactly what the gravamen of this information was, whether this was indeed really significant, really insider information, or whether this was simply stuff that anyone could have figured out just by reading the newspapers. So it's hard to know at this stage. without any kind of an investigation whether this information that he passed on through messages to Epstein, or something about, or we've finalized these this 500 billion euro fund in order to stabilize the euro. Gordon Brown is stepping aside as leader of the Labour Party, or that the British government is thinking of selling assets to deal with the financial crisis. I don't know. They all seem to be fairly banal and not, hardly insider dope. But anyway, you can say, okay, well, fine. You can resign as a minister, but having your life peerage taken away from you does seem a little harsh. And he, so as I say, I have no particular truck with Mandelson. I never thought Mandelson was so um, it was really so secure. But I have to think that this Epstein thing is really a kind of hysteria that just simply will never end. And I'm saying it really will never end. I am sure that 20 years time, people will still be talking about the Jeffrey Epstein files and the documents that still have not been released. So it's just like they released 3 million documents on Friday. And of course, what do the newspapers go with today? The Guardian. Oh, the victims. Jeffrey Epstein's victims are outraged because so many documents have been withheld. So, however much you release, there's always going to be outrage that the key documents have not been released. So it's like you're never going to be pleased. Whatever they tell you, there's always going to be the documents that have not been released. Now, in the nature of things, there are always going to be documents that have not been released. I mean, it's just that there's so many documents. I mean, if we look at Epstein, there have now been so many investigations of him, and so many inquiries, and so I mean, it's just, this has gone on for years and years, all these investigations. And of course, they've generated an enormous number of documents, leaving aside all of the documents that he himself generated, all the emails that he sent, that we didn't send. So there's always going to be an awful lot of documents that have not been released. So people want these documents released, while at the same time we must protect the we have to protect the victims. Now, so I still would like to know, leave aside the aspect that he obviously was, his whole raison d'etre was cultivating rich and important people. I mean, he's just spent his time cultivating rich and important people. Though generally not very political people. I mean, if one thinks about the politicians, and so it has not really has not done that. Now, he so you want to say, okay, well, what deals has did he effect? What would, just name some deals that somehow, well, that was, he intervened and he made this deal happen. He was him. He was, he somehow was the key figure that made this and this happen. I still haven't heard that. I mean, we can hear, yeah, he had friends with Bill Gates. He was friends with Steve Bannon, with Woody Allen. Um, but those people at least had influence, did things. Whatever else you think. Woody Allen made films. Bannon engineered, or helped inspire the populist movements in Europe. Then so, but what did Epstein do? And this is where it gets so mysterious. Um, we know what others did. You know, if one wants to examine Mandelson, you can see what Mandelson did. Uh, but I still don't see what Epstein did. Um, you know, indeed, I don't even see where what exactly Epstein did. I mean, other than spend his time gossiping and sending out messages and organizing dinner parties, and maybe trying to bring girls into the country. I still don't get what it is he was doing all day. So I get what the other people were doing. I get all the people who were in his orbit. I understand what they were doing. I just don't understand what he was doing. So I don't understand why he gets to be the center of all of this. And the only reason we take him to be the center of all of this, the only reason why we're any interested in this is that he had been convicted back in 2008 of procuring underage girls for prostitution, that was what he pleaded guilty to. And that's the reason why we're still preoccupied with Jeffrey Epstein. Other than that, you would say, well, this is just yet another rich grifter who devoted his time to sucking up to very, very important people, and so therefore, that's but uh, you know, as I say, I don't care much about Mandelson. I do think that Prince Andrew, I think, got a rough deal, and I think it's generally interesting why the British are taking all of this far more seriously than the Americans are. And since I generally don't think that the British are especially smart, I don't think they're as smart as the Americans. That I think it just reflects the fact that they're taking things, approaching things in a kind of dim-witted way. But anyway, that's my view. And I know people are going to, thinking, all the various things. Oh, you're doing this, and this, but the fact, when they brought up all the business of Putin, they said, oh, he's working for Putin. But that only tells you that essentially the whole Epstein is still a kind of empty slate. We still don't really know what he was doing other than, grifting and pretending to others that he was a very important and influential person. Oh, I can do this, I can arrange that. Giving people money, buying them, first class airline tickets, and but we just don't know what exactly he did. And so because of that, naturally, people start inserting all of their fantasies, including the one about Russia. Ah, that's it. We solved the mystery. He was working for Putin. And of course, all of this is seamless because generally during the Cold War, everybody always believed that the KGB was behind almost anything. Just anything untoward happens. Oh, that was because of the KGB, and then that just it was simply taken over in the in the post Cold War era. Well, of course, it was Putin. But so that's a familiar thing. Okay, well, okay, the Russians are there, and of course, he, uh, Epstein, naturally wanted to present himself to others that he had some kind of an in with important Russian people. Why wouldn't he? Why would he? Yeah, I can get this done. What was striking about it, why his influence was so limited, is that he never managed to worm his way back into Trump's favor. So for all of that, for all that they had once been friends back in the 90s, and then from 2015 on, as Trump rose to obviously to heights that no one had expected him to. I mean, he was just a reality TV show host and a real estate guy. Well, why would anyone expect him to succeed in winning the presidency? But during that time, he failed to worm his way into Trump's good graces. And that wasn't for want of trying. He clearly wanted to do that. He wanted to be, back in with his old friend. And he didn't succeed. So little did he succeed in that it was Trump, his old friend Trump, the DOJ under Trump, that essentially reopened the case. He thought that he was safe. That all that stuff in Florida had now been settled. And then 10 years earlier, it was Trump's Justice Department that re-indicted him. And of course, then he went to federal prison, and then, of course, he died. Now, you would think if he was so important, such a huge, influential figure, and he had so many rich, important, influential friends, that they would do the minimum for him. Either try and get him in with Trump, see if he can somehow see if Trump can give him something. I mean, Trump presided over the federal government. You would think that Trump would be able to sling him a job, some minor job. You go negotiate something, go act as an intermediary between somebody or other. He didn't. Trump did not do that. And then worse, you would think, given all his friends, given all of his influence, all the money that he had spent, and so on, he'd be able to avoid getting re-indicted, which itself was kind of a bizarre thing, because you would think the whole point of signing a non-prosecution agreement is that you will not be prosecuted. I mean, there's no point in signing a non-prosecution agreement, pleading guilty to something, if the federal government can come back and prosecute you all over again, not for new crimes, but for the old crimes. So what the Trump Justice Department did, they prosecuted him essentially for things that he had done in the past. So you think that's the minimum that you would expect was a non-prosecution agreement. They're not going to prosecute me. So he wasn't even able to achieve that. And then we go, well, Israel. He was working for Israel. Yes, he was working for Israel. Yes. So why didn't he go to Israel and stay in Israel? I mean, you would think he knew that there were problems waiting for him in the United States, and go to Israel. They'll take him. They always have. Or his good friend Ehud Barak. Why couldn't he help him? And indeed, Why couldn't they spring him from prison, get him to Israel? Um, given he supposedly ran everything in the United States, just such a fantastically important figure that he was the center of everything, and you would think, well, the least that can be done for him is, he, either before he's indicted, he goes to Israel, or he's indicted, released on bail, and then he skips the country and goes to Israel. Something like that. All the Israel lobby could have got to Trump and said, "Don't, whatever you do, don't indict him. Don't indict Epstein. He's the most important person we have. There's no more important person working for Israel than Jeffrey Epstein. So you can't indict him." Yeah, he was such an important person. He he got indicted. The Trump administration welched on the non-prosecution agreement, bunged him into this horrible prison. He didn't get bail, so he wasn't released. And then lo and behold, he dies. Now, he evidently, you could say he was murdered, and you could say, well, who murdered him? But okay, but since nobody can who exactly murdered him, if he committed suicide, then that was testimony that Epstein himself knew that his chances of escaping these charges were zero. In the whole Me Too hysteria, there was no way in the world that he was going to walk from these charges, even though the charges, I think, were pretty flimsy. But I thought, I thought the charges against Harvey Weinstein were pretty flimsy, but that didn't make any difference. So that's why I have to think that this whole thing is artificial. It's all been whipped up. He's now becomes the most important man in the contemporary world. Apparently, the entire world revolved around Jeffrey Epstein, and so important was he that he wasn't able to avoid getting indicted by his former friend Donald Trump, and wasn't able to get to Israel, wasn't able to get bail, and so on. So I look at the documents, and what do the documents say? Okay, what we knew before. He was a brown noser par excellence. He brown nosed everybody. Bannon, Chomsky, Woody Allen, Bill Gates, Larry Summers. Anybody who was important or famous, it didn't even matter what their politics were. No, so, but the show must go on, and I'm sure people will disagree with me and tell me, oh yeah, it was Israel, Mossad, whatever, But then, it's the same with the, I've talked before about the Kennedy assassination, which is that, we're 60, so we're now 62 years on, and it doesn't matter how many more documents are published, and of course there will be more documents that people will demand, because of course, the Warren Commission investigation. Well, they went through a lot of documents. It's in the nature of the beast that there's an awful lot of documents that were generated, and so yeah, I'm sure that even as we speak, that there are documents we haven't seen yet, about the JFK assassination. I mean, yeah, I'm sure there are. I mean, the Warren Commission generated an awful lot of documents. They went through, a lot of material. So yeah, that would be the case. But anyway, so that's why I think that I will be long dead, and people will be talking about Jeffrey Epstein. I know that. That somehow the people who are toddlers today, who can barely walk today, will in 25 years time be arguing about Jeffrey Epstein. So anyway, that's a kind of an intro. A couple of things that I wanted to talk about is, of course, we're still in the situation that something else. But do you think that the emails are legit? I really don't know, because we don't know whether they were sent, because some of his emails were sent. Some he just sent to himself. Some were just simply drafts of emails. So we simply don't know, because all we're getting is from the his own computers. They haven't gone to the recipients, and so it's hard to know what any of this really uh, really amounts to. I mean, he was obviously somewhat aggrieved, and one of his grievances, as I said, was that he was unable to get himself back in with Trump. I mean, he and Trump had been great friends, and naturally, when you were friends with somebody, and now that person has gone on to great things, has gone on to become president of the United States. It's understandable, particularly if you're somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, who has devoted his whole life to cultivating rich, important, influential people. I mean, that's his. There's nothing else in his life than that. What else is he other than that? And if you've done all that, and he's still not getting you anything, so he's very aggrieved. And you can see he was also aggrieved because some people dropped him. Some people didn't drop him, but some people did drop him after the criminal case in Florida. And I think he was bitter about that. So that's why he kind of sent these emails somewhat. He was. I mean, particularly say in the case of Bill Gates. I mean, he was hurt, I think, that Bill Gates didn't want to associate with him. But we don't know whether he actually sent out this email, or he just drafted it, or just he sent it to himself, or whatever. Um, and the interesting thing about, I mean, Epstein, the only reason we're talking about it, as I say, is that the case in Florida, and then it was forgotten, and then it was revived by that stupid book written by that stupid woman who wrote for the was it Miami Herald or something? Wrote a very bad book about the whole the Epstein, and that helped to revive the Epstein case, because it had largely been forgotten. But anyway, and that gave the idea that he was hundreds, thousands who were underage girls that he was either raping, or exploiting, or whatever, which is not true. But nonetheless, that's how the impression got around. Now, all of the names that have come up, I mean, they weren't at all interested in these under these alleged underage girls. I mean, Mandelson, his good friend Mandelson is gay. So obviously that wasn't really part of the appeal of Epstein. And if you really want to know what is the appeal of Epstein, well, Mandelson gave a longish interview in the Times of London, and he said, "Well, he was a clever guy. He was fun to be with. He had nice dinner parties. You went to a dinner party at his house, and there were all sorts of people there. Bill Gates was one end of the table, and then Woody Allen was there, and then Steve Bannon was there. And he said, "Yeah, that's why I liked him." And of course, he was kind of generous with money. Nobody says no to money. So in the case of Mandelson, he gave Mandelson allegedly. We don't know because Mandelson, he said he wasn't sure. Um, but he gave Mandelson allegedly $75,000. Well, that's very nice. That's a nice chunk of change. And then he helped out. Epstein helped out Mandelson. I guess then boyfriend. Now he's Mandelson's husband. Help finance some course, some osteopath course, which is what he did. He was, he lavished money as a way of winning favors. As I say, I don't think he gave him in the end very much. It didn't save his life, but he had nice dinner parties. He got that. Um, so but as I say, since we are talking only about these allegedly underage girls, well, I didn't do this uh, that uh, didn't do much for Epstein, so didn't save his life. And yeah, so the that's that. Anyway, wanted to now move on to, I think, a more serious issue, which is that as into Trump, as to will he, won't he want to attack Iran. So the Iran thing is very strange. I mean, we've talked about this before, and what's odd about Trump's alleged determination to attack Iran is that we still don't know what it is that he's trying to accomplish. And obviously, we've heard. Oh, he said what's the nuclear weapons. So it says nuclear weapons. Now the issue then with Iran and nuclear weapons is very odd, since Iran has explicitly, not just hemming and hawing and not really saying anything um, unambiguously, has explicitly, unambiguously stated that it has no intention of developing nuclear weapons. It's a very unambiguous commitment. That wasn't the case with North Korea, and North Korea, when if you recall, went through a process of step by step withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and so it was clear for some years that North Korea would indeed become a nuclear power. Now, Iran said, no, we're not interested in nuclear weapons. We only have the nuclear enrichment. All right. So Trump may then say, okay, well, then nuclear enrichment is equivalent to developing nuclear weapons. That's very, very odd thing to say, because to be able to go from enriched uranium to nuclear weapons, that's several steps are needed. and you want to be at around 90% enrichment in order to have nuclear material to make nuclear weapons. So that would be the minimum. You want to get to about 90% enrichment. The JCPOA had it about a 3.5% or something like that. So it was nowhere near nuclear weapons capability that what Iran was doing. So that's one issue. Now the other issue, of course, is that Iran isn't actually enriching uranium now. I mean, from everything that one can gather, that Trump's attack on the nuclear facilities last June, um, was pretty devastating. Now, whether Iran would um, be able at some point to restart its nuclear enrichment program, we don't know. I mean, as things stand, Trump, inflicted a quite devastating blow against Iran's nuclear facilities. And so Iran, at the moment, is not enriching uranium. It's not enriching it. So let's go. So Iran says we have no intention of developing nuclear weapons. Iran is not enriching uranium. So why exactly are you bombing Iran, or why exactly are you planning on attacking Iran? Iran isn't doing what you claim it's doing. And as I say, even if he was enriching, even if it was enriching at whatever 10% enrichment, that wouldn't be enough, nowhere near enough, to get it into nuclear, the capability to develop a nuclear weapon. So that makes it very odd. So let's say you so what would you want? You would say Iran would have to sign a piece of paper to say we have no intention ever of enriching uranium, even though we're not enriching uranium right now, but we have no intention of ever enriching uranium. Okay, well, I mean, this would be a kind of an empty promise. Since you're not doing something, you just commit. Well, we'll just go on not doing something. I mean, okay. I mean, why would you think that that means anything? I mean, it's like you're making a promise not to do something that you're already not doing. So it doesn't really make a great deal of sense. The rest of Trump's demands, which is oh well, give up your ballistic missile program. Well, it's very hard to see how Iran can possibly sign on to that, and it's a ridiculous demand because that Iran needs that to defend itself. It's being attacked by Israel. It's being attacked by the United States, and the only deterrent um, that that Iran has against Israel and the United States is its ballistic missiles. I mean, it doesn't really have anything else. So it's hard to see how Iran can possibly make any concessions there. And then there's the issue of the proxies. But the problem with the proxies is that well, first of all, the proxies are much weakened. Hamas has taken a real pounding since October the 7th, 2023. And Hezbollah has also taken a pounding. So they're not exactly significant players in the Middle East. But even if they were significant players, it's not at all clear that that these so-called proxies are really acting on Iran's orders. Um, and I guess the evidence that they act independently of Iran is that when Hamas launched its attack on October the 7th, really Iran didn't do anything to help. I mean, it's not like, well, hey, launch your attack and we're going to back you up. They didn't do that. So one would think Iran, which is very, very cautious, cautious power, almost certainly thought that what Hamas did on October the 7th was very foolhardy and was bound to lead to a massive Israeli retaliation that would be devastating to the Palestinian people. And so it's not something that Iran would have urged Hamas to do. And I think same goes for Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah kind of mildly provided some kind of support for Hamas, but it was fairly ineffective, and was in the end, Hezbollah got the worst of all worlds. It neither provided any sufficient support for Hamas during that war, not anything that would alter Israel's actions in any way. But it was sufficient for Israel to launch an attack on Hezbollah. And Iran really didn't do anything very much. Iran did not provide any great support for Hezbollah. So it's not clear that these proxies are actually acting as agents of Tehran. So you look at those three demands of Trump's, and they don't make a great deal of sense. Certainly, they don't suggest that it makes making that the condition of launching an attack. It just seems stupid. It's not. You're seeking goals that you can easily accomplish by negotiation. So you're launching this attack. For no reason. You could easily accomplish whatever you could hope to accomplish through negotiation. And then, of course, there's the issue, which is what people say. Well, yeah, but that never mind these goals. That's not really what Trump is really interested in. What Trump really wants to do is regime change, and that's Israel's goal, and that's obviously Trump's goal. All right, well let's assume that that's the case. I'm not at all sure, incidentally, that Trump's goal is identical to Israel's goal, but let's assume that it is that he is indeed seeking a regime change, even though from all the evidence we've seen, regime change is not something Trump has been interested in. There was no regime change in Venezuela. He is now negotiating something with Cuba. We don't exactly know what. I don't think it's regime change. Whatever he's trying to work out with Cuba. But even if that were the case, even if what he was seeking was regime change, then you have to think, well, how would launching strikes against Iran accomplish that? How if you whatever let's say you bomb bases, you bomb command centers, you take out some ayatollahs, maybe even take out Khamenei, take out some IRGC commanders. You could, I guess you could do that. Okay, fine. You've done that. That still isn't going to get you to regime change. I mean, Israel did all that. Israel launched all those kinds of attacks in last June. It didn't get regime change. Now, it's then you can say, okay, well, what about if there's an insurrection taking place in Iran to coincide with U.S. attacks. Well, um, the problem there is, I think that that insurrection seems to have exhausted itself. I mean, they launched this uprising, and Trump didn't provide any military support. He said he would, he didn't. But now the uprising is gone. There is no uprising anymore. It's been put down, and I'm not at all sure they're going to start it up again. And even if they did try to start it up again to coincide with the U.S. attacks, then you would find that, or they would find that the public will not be with them. The public will say, "Hey, you're obviously a fifth column. You're obviously working for the enemy. You're working with the United States. You're working in tandem with the people who are bombing us." Well, that means they'll be completely discredited. I mean, if you start attacking a country, then the populace will inevitably rally around the government, because the government is standing up for the sovereignty of the people. Um, so if you want to strengthen the bond between government and people in Iran, if you want to make sure that there'll be no insurrection, there'll be no rebellion in Iran, then the best way of going about it is to bomb Iran. So I don't see that this gets you to regime change. And that's why I tend to think that Trump is thinking about getting out of this situation. So, but obviously, and this is why it's still the danger has not passed. That there are forces, and obviously the forces within the administration, all the various warmongers in the United States, that want to make sure that Trump doesn't go wobbly and that Trump goes ahead and attacks. And so, as things stood earlier today, it seemed like, well, that there was going to be a meeting in Istanbul on Friday between Steve Witkoff and the Iranian Foreign Minister Arakchi. And so it seemed like, well, we're kind of heading towards this meeting, and maybe something can be hammered out in Istanbul. But there are forces at play that want to make sure that doesn't happen. And Israel obviously does not want any kind of negotiation that keeps that government in place. So, as I say, Israel has no real plans. I mean, Israel has no idea how to remove the government in Iran. They just hope the United States just inflicts such devastating blows that Iran will just collapse. I mean, I think that's the Israeli idea. And anyway, here is the story in the New York Times. It says U.S. and Iranian officials to meet as Trump's threats loom. And it says President Trump's Middle East envoy and his son-in-law were expected to meet Iran's foreign minister in Istanbul on Friday amid tension between the countries. And then in recent weeks, diplomats from Turkey, Egypt, Oman, and Iraq have been talking with the two sides, ferrying messages between them in hopes of avoiding an escalation. Qatar's prime minister was recently in Iran as part of the diplomatic effort. And then it says Mr. Arakchi and Mr. Witkoff are communicating directly through text messages according to Iranian officials, and an American one. And then it says, to calm the situation, the two officials said, Iran is willing to shut down or suspend its nuclear program, a major concession, but it would prefer a proposal that the United States made last year to create a regional consortium to produce nuclear power. The two officials also said that the Secretary of Iran's National Security Council, Ali Lariani, had met in recent days with President Putin with a message from Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, that Iran would agree to ship its enriched uranium to Russia as it did under the 2015 pact. So, this is a story in the New York Times, so you always have to treat it with caution. But it was always likely that Iran would say, look, we will limit our enrichment to 3%, and whatever is above that, we will ship to Russia, as it was under the JCPOA. So any excessively enriched uranium above the 3% would be shipped to Russia, and Russia said, "Yeah, that's fine. We'll agree to that." Now, when you have 3% enriched uranium, that's not nuclear weapons capable. I mean, you can pretend, if you're a Mark Levin and those horrible Israel clowns, they can say, oh well, they're just a step away from nuclear weapons. You can pretend, but it isn't. 3% is 3%. You got to get up to 90% for the enriched uranium to be nuclear weapons capable. So that's that. Now, they have that. Then if you agree to that, and there's no sunset clause as there was under the JCPOA, then you say, well, all right, that's Trump could easily sign the deal, and everyone will be happy. There are no downsides for him politically, other than from the Israel lobby, and other than from of course, Israel. Israel is not going to be happy, but so what? He's the president of the United States. He's not president of Israel. So if you can see that Iran was saying, look, here's a deal. We can sign on to this deal. We're not going to eliminate our ballistic missiles program. And as for the our proxies, they act independently of us. So there's the basis for a deal. But of course, just because that's the sensible, the rational course of action, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen. So everything may go wrong, and that's why it's quite instructive that today the stories seem to be, as always, Iran is acting provocatively. So here is the story in the Washington Post: U.S. shoots down suspected Iranian drone that approached aircraft carrier. So here you have the story. It's always inevitable that just as there seems to be movement towards some kind of a deal, there is some provocative incident. And the provocative incident is coming from Iran. You would think Iran would want to make sure not to do anything at all to provoke the United States. The United States is obviously much the stronger power. So you don't want to do anything to provoke the United States, because if you provoke the United States, that provides the casus belli that Trump or anyone around him would be looking for. So, having failed to come up with a rationale for this attack on Iran, well, hey, what's we, as I say, all of the nuclear weapons, the humanitarian disaster, and whatever, all of those things are just fake, and obviously transparently false. So now we'll have a new rationale: an unprovoked Iranian attack. Iran, for reasons best known to itself, decided to attack the United States. US shoots down suspected Iranian drone that approached aircraft carrier. The White House said the aircraft was acting aggressively when it approached the USS Abraham Lincoln, which was sent to the Middle East amid renewed tensions between Washington and Tehran. Notice the neutrality there, as if it's somehow renewed tensions, rather than the United States essentially trying to coerce Iran. U.S. forces shot down the suspected Iranian drone approaching the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea. Officials said an escalatory move as Washington floods the region with military assets amid renewed tensions with Tehran. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt said the drone was acting aggressively when it approached the carrier, prompting commanders to order it shot down. Just acting aggressively. So you wonder why would Iran send out a drone against an aircraft carrier, knowing full well that the aircraft carrier has very strong anti-air defenses, and there was no hope whatsoever that a drone would actually get through. The incident occurred about 500 miles from Iran's southern coast. The drone was flying with unclear intent and it approached. As it approached, despite U.S. personnel using undescribed de-escalatory measures, and then so Iran is provoking a war with the United States. Well, that's nice. That's that makes sense. And then we have a story in Axios from Barak Ravid. He's always the man in the know, and look at the headline: Iran risks Trump's ire with a new diplomatic demands and military incidents. So it's Iran now provoking the United States. It's making new diplomatic demands and military incidents. So it says here, Iran has demanded changes to the venue and format for negotiations with the U.S. Two sources with knowledge tell Axios. And then meanwhile, the Iran military conducted two provocations. So it's not just one, two provocations against U.S. vessels in the Gulf. The incidents and new demands risk pushing President Trump off the diplomatic path and toward the military option. So there was Trump. He wants, he wants a diplomatic path. He wants to resolve it through negotiation, get everyone around the negotiating table. And yet Trump is being pushed from that path toward military escalation. And it's all because of Iran. Iran really wants this military escalation. The incidents and new demands risk pushing President Trump off the diplomatic path and toward the military option at a time when he has already assembled enormous firepower in the Gulf. Gee, I wonder if that has something to do with it. Having assembled this enormous firepower, what are you going to do now? I mean, you could send everyone home, or you can claim, and that's the easiest thing to do, you can claim we're under attack. Iran is attacking us. Anyway, it says the sources said the Iranians are walking back from understandings that were reached in recent days after several countries were ready. So it's the Iranians are walking back the understandings, I see. Not the United States, the Iranians, the unreasonable Iranians who are being threatened, but they're the ones who are being acting unreasonably. The Iranians want to move the talks from Istanbul to Oman. They also now want to hold them in a bilateral format, only with the US rather than with several Arab and Muslim countries attending as observers. Now, I have to say, I do find this extremely unbelievable, just like these military incidents I find unbelievable. I don't understand why Iran would would prefer a bilateral format rather than have several Arab and Muslim countries there, because the Arab and Muslim countries would be there essentially supporting Iran. I mean, the only reason the Arab and Muslim countries want to be there is to make sure that there's no attack on Iran. They want to make sure that a deal is signed. If it's a bilateral format, then Iran really doesn't have any hope. It's precisely, you bring others in, and then you've got that many bodies on your side against the United States, and behind the United States, Israel. A source with knowledge said that's because the Iranians want to limit the talks to nuclear issues and not discuss things like missiles and proxy groups that are priorities for other countries in the region. Well, none of that makes any sense. The only ones who are worried about the missiles are, of course, Israel and the United States. As for the proxy groups, well, as I say, the proxy groups are really hardly major players anymore. I mean, Hezbollah is so weakened, and who worries about Hezbollah? Well, the only ones concerned about Hezbollah is Israel. And I mean, maybe Saudi Arabia does worry about the Houthis, but that Saudi Arabia has actually improved relations with Iran, and that's not the reason why the Arab and Muslim countries want to take part in the talks. They want to take part in the talks precisely to persuade the United States not to attack. The way this Axios article is framed is that the Arab and Muslim countries are really eager for the United States to attack, and so Iran doesn't want them there because they would want this attack on Iran. They don't want an attack on Iran. The reason they don't want an attack on Iran is they don't want to do anything that strengthens the hand of Israel. If Iran is eliminated as a power in the region, then really there's no balance at all against Israel. So it says here, meanwhile, the Iranian military took what a U.S. official described as two very aggressive actions toward U.S. vessels in a span of 6 hours. In that first incident, Revolutionary Guards fast gunboats attempted to board a U.S.-flagged commercial ship near the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so attempted to board that. Okay, and why would they do that? And then say the Iranian boats scattered before a U.S. Navy destroyer arrived to escort the ship with support from the Air Force. So again, why would Iran want to do? At the very moment of such tension, why would you want to do anything provocative? No shots were fired. In the second incident, an Iranian drone with unclear intent flew near the USS Lincoln aircraft carrier and was shot down by an F-35 fighter jet. And then a U.S. official described both actions as very aggressive and noted they came just 6 hours apart. So the United States, so they're very aggressive, And so what the United States is claiming is that it is the victim of Iranian aggression. So the United States has brought its aircraft carrier fleet into the region, and Trump is openly talking about attacking Iran. He has been talking about it now for some time. For several weeks, he's been threatening to attack Iran. But now, Iran is being very aggressive because of some very murky incidents. But Iran is acting very aggressively. And so Axios reports this also. Iran is acting very aggressively. So, the United States will have to act defensively against this aggressor, Iran. In the CENTCOM statement, Hawkins said, quote, continued Iranian harassment and threats in international waters. Iranian harassment and threats in international waters. Yeah, we've got an entire aircraft carrier fleet, destroyers, all the F-35, all the aircrafts and everything, as all of they're poised to attack Iran. The threats of explicitly made by President Trump, and they just these boats, they're in international waters and they're just minding their own business. I mean, it's just anyone can, it's just it's an aircraft carrier fleet and all the destroyers, they're just in international waters, not doing any harm, just having a good time, enjoying themselves, enjoying the weather, having breakfast. And Iran, this aggressive state of Iran, is harassing. It's harassing this aircraft carrier fleet. It's just harassing them. Stop harassing us. We're just fishing. We're in international waters. We're not doing any harm to anyone, and will not be tolerated. Iran's unnecessary aggression near U.S. forces, regional partners, and commercial vessels increases risks of collision. Not our threats, the daily issued threats against Iran. No. It's Iran that's risking collision, miscalculation, and regional destabilization. We're not responsible for that. No. We're not responsible for miscalculation and regional destabilization. And then Iranian Foreign Minister Arakchi and White House envoy Steve Witkoff are expected to lead the two negotiating teams. Arakchi held calls on Tuesday with his Omani and Turkish counterparts and with the Prime Minister of Qatar. And then, meanwhile, Witkoff met in Israel with Netanyahu. What a surprise. Israeli officials say the meeting focused on Iran, and Netanyahu brought along, his basic military team, and so that's so you can see now how this is shaping up. The clearly the stories about the nuclear weapons is so threadbare. This is even more threadbare than Saddam Hussein and the weapons of mass destruction. And then we've got the ballistic missiles, and the rest. That all of it is becoming very, very flimsy. So now we've got the new rationale for attacking Iran. We have to retaliate. Iran is waging an aggressive war against us. We're just minding our own business, not doing any harm to anyone. Just fishing. We're in the Mediterranean. We're just fishing. So that I think it's interesting. Just as we're talking about maybe negotiations at the end of the week, then suddenly this an attack. Anyway, a couple of other things I just want to bring up. In France today, the French prosecutors raided the office of Elon Musk's ex, and because France is so committed to free speech, that it acts continually against all social media platform. Pavel Durov is still in France. He's still facing prosecution. But now the French authorities have decided to up the ante against Elon Musk's X, and we know that the EU has slapped fines on X, substantial fines. But now we're getting prosecutors who are coming after X. And so here is the story in the Guardian. Um, so here we have French headquarters of Elon Musk's X raided by Paris cybercrime unit. Prosecutors summon tech billionaire and company's ex-CEO for questioning as part of an expanded investigation. And then here, prosecutors have raided the French headquarters of Elon Musk's social media platform X and summoned the tech billionaire and the company's former chief executive for questioning as part of an investigation into alleged cybercrime. Okay. And then, so this was their post. The Paris prosecutors posted this: a search is underway by the cybercrime unit of the Paris prosecutor's office, at the National Police Cybercrime Unit, and Europol. And it added in a statement that Musk and Linda Yaccarino had been summoned for voluntary questioning in their capacity as de facto and de jure managers of the X platform at the time of the events. Of course, Yaccarino, is no longer CEO of X. And then the prosecutor's office said it was examining alleged complicity in offenses related to the platform, including the spreading of child abuse images and sexually explicit deepfakes, the denial of crimes against humanity, and manipulation of an automated data processing system as part of an organized crime. Now, as we know, the issue of this child abuse images, I've never seen anywhere on Facebook, Twitter, anywhere, any images of child abuse. But this is the politicians always bring this up when they propose legislation to bring the social media platforms to heel. They always talk about these child abuse images that no one's actually ever seen. And then the sexually explicit deep fakes, which, it's not hard. Anyone with any minimal knowledge of editing images, AI, can create sexually explicit deep fakes. I don't know, it's not I imagine it's not that difficult. I mean, you can go to Google and you'll see Google images, they're filled with sexually explicit deep fakes. I mean, it's very easy to do. So you're cracking down on X because people know how to manipulate their editing software. And then it says denial of crimes against humanity. So you notice how they slip that in as so child abuse images. So the reader says, "Oh, that's terrible." Sexually explicit deepfakes. Oh, that's awful. And then they say, "Oh, the denial of crimes against humanity." Well, that seems to me a very different sort of issue, because if you say denials of crimes against humanity, they mean anyone, for instance, who questions any aspect of the Holocaust. Now, anyone should be able to question anything. I mean, whatever your views. I mean, however ridiculous and arguments may be, nonetheless, it's a part of free speech, free debate, free inquiry, that nothing is taboo. You can absolutely question anything. You can also, be refuted. But he says, oh, but they now say that there's something out against the law. There's something against the law. See how they phrased it. It's against the law to, the way they put it, it's against the law to deny crimes against humanity. Now, in many European countries, Holocaust denial is illegal, which is okay, ridiculous because no speech, no commentary should be illegal. But then, of course, you can say, well, what other crimes against humanity can you deem illegal? Well, of course, if you deny the genocide took place in Bosnia and Herzegovina, as of course I do, that also can be illegal. So you suddenly start spreading the net of all kinds of things that are deemed illegal. And that is, of course, the point. That's why they go after the social media. It's nothing to do with these child abuse images, because those things are already, and I mean, the moment they pop up, they get taken down. I mean, it's just, they don't just leave them there. That's why you never see them. So somebody posts something that's obviously an image of child abuse, so it gets taken down. But what you can't have is anyone calling any liberal shibboleths into a question. So that was um, the inevitability, um, and the uh, was it, I wanted to also bring up um, Trump's um, strange. He had a strange conversation yesterday with uh, Prime Minister Modi of India, and so they spoke on the phone, and then after this conversation, Trump sent out the truth, saying, "Oh well, we've ended our trade dispute." And significantly, then he said in that truth that Iran has promised that it will no longer purchase any Russian oil. So here, let's just take a look at what Trump sent out yesterday. And so this is, it was an honor to speak with Prime Minister Modi of India this morning. He's one of my greatest friends and a powerful and respected leader of his country. We spoke about many things, including trade and ending the war with Russia and Ukraine. He agreed to stop buying Russian oil and to buy much more from the United States and potentially Venezuela. This will help end the war in Ukraine, which is taking place right now, with thousands of people dying each and every week. So I guess he means this will help end the war in Ukraine. This is part of the idea that once Russia no longer is able to earn money from its oil and gas sales, then that will bring Putin to the negotiating table or whatever. Um, Out of friendship and respect for Prime Minister Modi, and as per his request, effective immediately, we agreed to a trade deal between the United States and India, whereby the United States will charge a reduced reciprocal tariff, lowering it from 25% to 18%. They will likewise move forward to reduce their tariffs and non tariff barriers against the United States to zero. The Prime Minister also committed to buy American at a much higher level. In addition to over $500 billion of U.S. energy, technology, agricultural, coal, and many other products, our amazing relationship will be even stronger going forward. Prime Minister Modi and I are two people that get things done, something that cannot be said for most. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So, right away, there's some odd aspects to this. Of all countries that have massive tariff barriers against the United States, that's India. I mean, it's like they really go out of their way to protect their producers and to keep American goods out. So it seems very strange for Trump to come up with a deal with a country that actually has huge tariffs. But it has something. India has some of the biggest tariffs in the world. The and it's on the face of it somewhat unlikely that India is going to accept American agricultural products. But the the you know other aspect of it is this is supposedly the Indian commitment to buy lots of energy from the United States. Now, why would India stop buying discounted oil from Russia in favor of much more expensive um, energy from the United States? I mean, India gets a sweetheart deal from Russia. It doesn't pay world prices. It gets a substantial discount. So that makes that all very odd. And so this is the he makes this claim that Iran that India has agreed to this, but Modi in his tweet does not confirm any of that. He says, "Wonderful to speak with my dear friend President Trump today. Delighted." Yeah. The other thing is that Trump says, "Oh, we've gone the tariff have gone down from 25% to 18%." But in fact, the tariff that he had on India was not 25%. He was on 50%. Remember, he slapped 50% tariffs on India because India was purchasing oil. I mean, from oil from Russia. That was the punishment. That was a few months ago. That was his punishment of India for purchasing oil from Russia. But now he's claiming, oh, they've gone down from 25% to 18%. It was actually 50%. And says, big thanks to President Trump on behalf of the 1.4 billion people of India for this wonderful announcement. When two large economies and the world's largest democracies work together, it benefits our people and unlocks immense opportunities for mutually beneficial cooperation. President Trump's leadership is vital for global peace, stability, and prosperity. India fully supports his efforts for peace. I look forward to working closely with him to take our partnership to unprecedented heights. So, usual boilerplate. No mention of the oil that he's basically. Trump had said no, he's not going to be buying any oil from Russia. How did he phrase it? He said um, he agreed to stop buying Russian oil and to buy much more from the United States. So no mention of any of that in Modi's tweet. And then here this is the report about how Russia responded to Trump's announcement. It says, haven't heard from India about stopping purchases of Russian oil. Trump announced, and then it says here, the Kremlin stated that it had not heard from India about halting Russian energy purchases after President Trump said that New Delhi had agreed to stop buying it as part of the India-US trade deal. So far, we haven't heard any statements from New Delhi on this matter, said Peskov. We respect bilateral US-Indian relations, but we attach no less importance to the development of an advanced strategic partnership in Russia and India. This is the most important thing for us, and we intend to further develop our bilateral relations with Delhi. And then it says India has been importing about 1.5 million barrels of Russian crude per day, even after Trump imposed 20% punitive tariffs on Indian goods. So that's what raised it up to 50% tariffs, making it over 1/3 of the overall Indian imports. And then the Indian government had previously defended its Russian oil trade, calling it essential to the country's energy security. And then here's TASS reporting India's immediate halt of Russian oil import is extremely unlikely. And then says Indian analysts and oil refineries representatives believe it is unlikely that India will completely stop buying Russian oil in the near future. According to the newspaper, despite President Trump's statement that India has promised to stop importing Russian oil, experts say a complete halt is extremely unlikely, at least for the next 2 to 3 months. Moreover, they warn that if India did completely halt Russian cargoes, the implication for the world's fastest growing economy could be disruptive. Refineries reps and analysts clarified that there's been no government directive to stop purchasing oil from Russia. I think that has to be right because it's hard to see um, how India would benefit from cutting off uh, purchases of Russian oil. I mean, obviously, it would hurt its economy. I mean, it does very well out of this discounted Russian oil, and you become dependent on the United States. Things are going to get quite difficult for you. I think other countries are going to find it. It is. It's not great to be dependent upon the United States. So he can make commitments. Oh yeah, we're going to make $500 billion worth of purchases of energy, but it's one thing to make that commitment. Another thing it is to see it through. Anyway, let's now go to our locals board and address the the issues raised by gagglers. These are the people who keep this community going, and they do it by looking after the dogs, making the sure that the dogs are you know kept happy, as happy as they're capable of being, and fed, watered, and kept warm during the winter. Because the dogs are the ones who kind of make this gaggle community work. So they're the ones who have to be kept happy. So anyway, thank you so much, gagglers. Really appreciate it. Anyway, first question from Stone River. Thank you, Stone River, as always, for your generosity. Stone River says, George, do you think that Trump's seeming approach of bullying countries into submission rather than attempting regime change is strategic or instinctive? Do you think the national security complex has bought in? Well, the interesting thing, I guess, um, is the issue: is Trump really pursuing regime change rather than buying off leaders and getting them to play ball with him? And I think the way you put it, bullying countries into submission. So it's a different approach from what we had become used to in the post-Cold War era. So we had all the color revolutions, all of course sponsored by the West, and and then we had regime change in Yugoslavia, we had regime change in Libya, Georgia, obviously Ukraine. Um, Trump doesn't seem to be going down that path. I mean, he seems to be thinking in terms of how do I buy people off? If I can provide enough financial incentives, um, some coercion, and then they get to play ball with us. So you can see how I think Venezuela is the model for Trump. Most people thought, oh, okay, he wants regime change, but regime change is very messy. They often do not succeed, and then they create long, protracted civil wars. Down the road. That was the sort of the model. That's the Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama model, and Trump isn't quite pursuing that. So when we look at what is he trying to do in Cuba, um, I don't think it's really overthrowing the communist regime. That there are people around him who want to do that, but it's I want to show where because there was something he gave a very brief very brief answer to a reporter about Cuba, and it was I thought quite interesting. It in that it gave how he's how he's thinking about that. So let me just show this. So here, just if you just look at the words that he uses. So here is he was asked about Cuba. This was I think yesterday.
Well, Cuba's a failing nation. It has been for a long time, but now it doesn't have Venezuela to prop it up. So we're talking to the people from Cuba, the highest people in Cuba, to see what happens. I want the people that came here that were horribly treated by Cuba to be taken care of, to be able to go back and do what they have to do. They have their family there. They haven't been able to see them in years, many, many years. So I think we're going to make a deal with Cuba. It's in bad shape. Cuba's in bad shape.
All right. So here it sounds very much like that he wants to make a deal with Cuba. He's saying, "Oh, well, that some of those people who left Cuba, and we're talking about this was a long time ago. I mean, we had the people who left Cuba in the late 1950s, early 1960s. Okay, that's a previous generation. Then, of course, the people who left Cuba during the Mariel boat lift, that was in the 1980s. So now he's saying, okay, well, we're going to work something out with the government so that these people could come back. Well, presumably they come back and open up some businesses. I mean, they don't. It's not just a matter of family reunions; that they'll be able to open up some businesses or whatever. If um, that if he tries to work out a deal with Cuba and says, "Look, you don't have any, your sources of oil have run out. You're not getting free oil from Venezuela. Mexico isn't going to go out on a limb and provide you with oil. So we'll make sure you have oil, but then you've got to start accommodating the the various uh, you know businessmen and from whose ancestors, his fathers and grandfathers, had left Cuba. Start accommodating them. So he's thinking in a very different way. I mean, maybe the end result will be the same, but it's not quite the Victoria Newland Obama method. I mean, he's not asking the government in Cuba to resign and make way for an American sponsored government. Um, so it's that seems to be like how he wants to do this, because I think he sees regime change as a very long, messy process from which he will not derive any benefits. Look at Libya. Look what happened in Syria. That war went on for years and years, and why? What benefits did United States get, and what benefits will he derive? So I think he's making a calculation. Now, whether that's a correct calculation or not, that he can, he won't actually achieve regime change. He will more coerce countries into submission. Keep the regime in place, but coerce them into submission because they have no real hope of anything else. I mean, it's like, sorry, multipolarity mavens, there's no multipolarity in this world. It's the unipolar moment is still with us. I mean, there's no one is around to challenge U.S. supremacy. I mean, it's just the U.S. is overwhelmingly dominant, and therefore, if you're Cuba, you're in Mexico, you really cannot defy the United States. No one's coming riding to your rescue. And I think Trump knows this, but doesn't see any advantages in in toppling regimes and then creating years, decades of instability. So I think that's how Trump sees it. But I think that's his own. I think that's his vision. I don't think it's anyone within the administration, because I don't think that's the view of Sebastian Gorka, who still works for him. We don't hear much about him, but I'm sure he spends his time writing memos for the president. But I don't think Sebastian Gorka would be particularly happy about keeping the Cuban government, the communist Cuban government, in power, or keeping the Chavistas in power in Venezuela. So I don't think I think it's his view. I mean, he is kind of um, cautious um, approach, though maintaining this the demand for U.S. global hegemony, but nonetheless pursuing it in a more prudent way than Bush or Obama did. Anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. And then Cynthia, always good to see you, Cynthia. Cynthia's our I always say this, is a film critic, film scholar, film encyclopedist, who just provides us with just amazing information and about the films that we screen, and provides an enormous amount of just insights and aesthetic criticism, aesthetic judgments on the films. But Cynthia also writes, contributes these really, very very intriguing and profound questions, regularly in these live streams. So, we're really very lucky to have Cynthia as a contributor to the Gaggle, and that's why I urge everybody, those who are listening to the Gaggle on YouTube, or those who are joining us through Rumble or through X, please join our community, thegaggle.locals.com, because we have very high caliber contributors, who really, you know, have extraordinarily acute insights into art, philosophy, history, and politics, including, of course, Cynthia. So thank you so much, Cynthia. Anyway, Cynthia then says, when Putin said Western elites have for centuries grown accustomed to filling their stomachs with human flesh and their pockets with money, that vampire ball is coming to an end, it sounded less like an abstract rhetoric than a pointed allusion to the Epstein files. The imagery goes beyond corruption, casting Western elites as sadistic and cannibalistic in their exploitation of others. It clearly reads less as a metaphor than as a deliberate condemnation of moral rot. Any thoughts? Well, I agree. I agree with your characterization. I'm not sure that it was he meant it as the as the Epstein file, but that's no doubt the way the Russian leadership now looks upon the West. Um, what I would say about that, which is, and that's certainly, it's certainly a tenable and a good argument that, which very reasonable to say about the West, and the long story of Western imperialism, exploitation, and so on. No question. The problem for Russia is that it embraced the West. It's you can't now go back and restore this kind of neo-Bolshevik analysis of the world, of capitalism, imperialism, exploitation. This is playing in these old tunes from the days of Lenin and all the way through to Gorbachev, because during the Gorbachev and post Gorbachev era, Russia basically said, "Hey, you were right, we were wrong. Capitalism is fantastic. Everything that the Bolsheviks did was wrong, and the whole Soviet experiment was terrible. Communism was disastrous." And as Yeltsin said when he went to Congress in 1992 and addressed a joint House of Congress, communism is now dead in Russia and will never again rear its ugly head. That's what he said. That was, and then everyone in Congress, there's all these capitalists and imperialists, these exploiters. They all jumped to their feet and wildly applauded Yeltsin. And of course, Yeltsin was Putin's patron, and Putin was part of the overthrow of the Soviet system. Now, um, once you've done that, once you've embraced the West and said, yeah, that the way the West organizes things, the way the West sees things, that's really the way to do things. Then it becomes difficult to turn around and say, well, hey, but it was all based on immorality. It's all based on exploitation. How did you put it the way? They've grown accustomed to filling their stomachs with human flesh. Them strong words, filling their stomachs with human flesh and their pockets with money. So it's good, you can say all of that, and that's very nice, but it's a little late now. You've already embraced the West. You've already said that these are the people who had the right idea. They figured out how the world is supposed to work. Capitalism is obviously the way to do things. Markets were the way to do things. And those who defied this, those who fought against this, chiefly the Bolsheviks, well, they were in the wrong. So it's that's it's kind of an odd for Putin, who is not not a Marxist, not a Leninist, who actually was again he worked within the whole Yeltsin setup, and he what wanted a capitalism in Russia, and wanted to work with the West, with the Western capitalists. So now he's embraced this the old kind of Bolshevik style. That's fine. I mean, if he wants to do that, then that's okay. But it somehow, to me, it sounds a little fake. To be honest, it's just because now Russia has is in a serious confrontation with the West. So out comes this resuscitated Marxist Leninist analysis of the world, and of course underlying it all is the Russia's project of cultivating the global South. Hey, they're going to be on our side because they will remember the old days of the Soviet Union, how we supported them. We supported their liberation against the imperialists, and so all their goodwill towards the Soviet Union will now be transferred to us. And I think there's some truth to that. But the problem, I think, the problem with that is, I think that you've now essentially gone back, to dining out on the achievements of the Soviet Union, and that goes together with obviously with the the sanctification of World War II and the fight against fascism by the Soviet Union. So now you've got all the Soviet Union, which championed the poor native indigenous peoples of the world against the rapacious capitalists. So you're going back to um, the old kind of Soviet themes, and it it it, it seems odd. That's what it seems odd. When 20 years ago you were saying the opposite. Now you've realized, yeah, they are being exploited. So anyway, that's that. Now then, Cynthia goes on. Here's a 2012 email titled Davos from the Epstein files that contradicts what you cited about Epstein having friendly ties to Putin. No, well, I didn't cite it. I mean, I said the that that I wasn't buying any of the stories that Epstein had any connection with Russia beyond the usual kind of, hey, how can I get into Davos? How can I get into the Munich Security Conference? How can I get into BRICS? How can I get into the St. Petersburg Economic Forum? Because that's who he was. He was a world class grifter, and he wanted to be in at any conference. But in fact, we were talking about this yesterday. I absolutely disputed that there was any connection between him and Putin. And 2 years before Maidan, it shows Epstein and Boris Nikolic discussing strategies for regime change in Russia, and identifies Duma member Ilya Ponomarev. Yeah, that's right, who later fled to Ukraine to work with Zelensky as a potential replacement for Putin, and hints that Epstein might have considered traveling to Russia to help remove him from power. No, I think that's right. I think that Epstein, um, you know, hung out with rich and important people in chiefly in the United States, and these rich and important people, these friends of his, they had no time for Putin and wanted somebody else in Russia, and so Epstein naturally went along with that. He wasn't going to stick his neck out and support Putin. So yeah, and absolutely, there's nothing at all tying him to Putin. I mean, it was just made up, particularly by the awful, unspeakable British media, who somehow said, "Oh, he was working for the KGB," which doesn't even hasn't existed since 1991, and that somehow he was working for Putin. No, absolutely, he was thinking about some alternative. I mean, ridiculous. I mean, obviously, his understanding of Russia was as shallow and as stupid as most of America's elite's understanding of Russia, in thinking that Ilya Ponomarev had the slightest chance of becoming a leader in Russia. So oh yeah, it's going to be him. Of course, it's not going to be him. But that was. Remember, that was 2012, and that was in the Hillary Clinton era. Remember, Hillary Clinton was promoting all sorts of alternatives to Putin, which was, of course, it was an absolute disaster. And anyway, Cynthia goes on. Here's a March 2014 email exchange between Epstein and the Rothschilds, in which Rothschild suggested meeting to discussing Ukraine. Epstein replied that the upheaval in Ukraine would create many opportunities, yes, which it did. A lot of people got quite rich in Ukraine, and of course, Epstein, you know, conventional thinker, or thinker is too much of a word, conventional grifter that he was, naturally thought, hey, I can make some money. I mean, if Hunter Biden, an idiot like Hunter Biden, can make money in Ukraine, and John Kerry's I think stepson could make money in Ukraine, I should be able to make some money in Ukraine. No, I mean, yeah, that's exactly what I would expect from him. So, create many opportunities, suggesting he saw personal financial gain in the chaos following 2014 Maidan coup. Instability that also worked against Russian interests, indicating again his ties to Putin weren't friendly at all. Absolutely. Absolutely. They were not friendly. And it was just simply made up by the idiotic British media to say, hey, now is solved the Jeffrey Epstein mystery. How did he get to be so rich? The Russians gave him some money for whatever services that rendered. And you're absolutely right, Cynthia, that a casual perusal through these emails show that he was exactly taking the opposite view. He was trying to make money in post Maidan Ukraine, and was foolishly promoting potential leaders in Russia that had no hope whatsoever of coming to power. And then anyway, Cynthia goes on, and here's a 2019 email showing that Epstein made a reservation at the Hyatt Kiev in February. That was during election time when Zelensky was set to become president. Whether Epstein went to Kiev is unknown, but the record exists. Chronologically, the pattern is striking. 2012, regime change in Russia. 2014, many opportunities after Maidan. 2019, possible trip to Kiev during Zelensky's rise. Once again, it shows that Epstein's ties to Putin were anything but friendly. Well, I put it stronger than that. I don't think there are any ties to Putin. And I think as I think you've shown, he was a grifter. You were thinking that he can make some money, and that's still the case. That lots of people who want to see Russia defeated in Ukraine think in terms of the breakup of Russia, and think in terms of how they can make a huge amount of money in Russia, just as the various disgusting grifters of the 1919, all the various um, carpetbaggers who went to Russia, like Bill Browder, made money by swindling the Russian people, and that's absolutely what they think now. If Russia is defeated, there will be lots and lots of opportunities to make money, and that's exactly what Jeffrey Epstein was thinking. And yeah, hey, we can make money in Ukraine, we can make money in Russia. But you're absolutely right. The record is exactly the opposite of his working for Putin, or being friendly to Putin or anything. Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And there, here is Marty. Always very good to see you, Marty. And Marty always introduces himself with a hilarious meme. And this is, of course, Mark Rutte. Mark Rutte, who always seems so buffoonish. And in this photograph, he looks particularly idiotic. He seems to be laughing about something. Everybody else is laughing, but to be honest, they're trying a little bit too hard to be laughing. I was going to talk a little bit about Rutte today, but there wasn't really time, because he was in Kiev chatting with his good friend uh, Zelensky, and yeah, there was a couple of interesting things that came out. Rutte still seems to think that some kind of a NATO deployment in Ukraine after a ceasefire is feasible. So I think that was interesting, but maybe we'll talk about that on Thursday. That news conference that Rutte gave in Kiev today. So, but yeah, he's that photograph. I mean, I don't know how do you find these pictures, Marty? I mean, it's such a you know, it's such a classic that you look um, laughing uproariously, looking really idiotic. Anyway, thank you so much, Marty, always as always for your generosity. Um, and then Richard Phillips says Mandy, that's not Mandelbaum, Mandelson. Peter Mandelson is a snob with expensive taste, who spends more than he can earn. 3 times now he's got into serious trouble over money. Yep. Is it only 3 times? One, two, three. He was fired twice. Um, yeah, I mean the 3 times, yes, because but the throughout the Epstein connection was a kind of an ongoing thing. I mean, this went on for many years. You're right. Three times he got into serious trouble over money because, of course, no, that you characterize it correctly. He lives way above his his means, and he likes the lavish lifestyle, and therefore that makes him very susceptible to rich contributors, or the wealthy benefactors. And that's exactly what got him into trouble before the two resignations. Also, he was these rich benefactors were giving him money. The extraordinary thing is, though, is that he managed to survive all of those. I mean, he resigned in disgrace, but somehow managed to find his way back into the Blair government. Um, and yeah, yeah, he likes to eat well, he likes to drink well, and so that's yeah, when that happens. But there've been politicians like that. I remember so many of them in the UK who really had a taste for the good life, but they weren't able to. They could like they weren't earning enough to sustain that kind of lifestyle. I remember is that Tory. Nobody now remembers him. Reginald Maudling. Um, he. That goes back a long way to the 1950s, and he was expected to win the leadership of the Conservative Party rather than Edward Heath, and it was a close contest, but Heath won out. But um, Maudling just loved money. I mean, he adored money. He is, just it's like you almost saw him kind of, getting a wad of money and just kissing it because he just loved money. And of course, he got himself into a lot of trouble, and his career ended fairly ignominiously. But you're right. That's who um, um, you know Mandelson is. But he's a smart guy, and you'd have to say, though, when you listen to interviews with him and you read that interview in the Times, he because he's so smart. That's why the labor leaders couldn't do without him. I think they were lost without him. That's why they kept bringing him back, because he had to, he had a certain political shrewdness, and could make sure that they stayed in power. Because I don't think Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, I don't think they were all that smart, but he was really the brains behind the operation. Anyway, he borrowed money with no interest for mortgage. Yes, that's right. He borrowed no interest. He got an interest free loan, and he was also bribed to Russia passport application. Yeah, that's right. And then apparently, um, Jeffrey Epstein gave him $75,000. I mean, Mandelson denies this, or at least he doesn't quite deny it. He says he doesn't remember, which is a nice way of putting it. I don't remember this about this $75,000. I just I can't remember. One of these things. So many things happening every day. You just can't remember somebody giving you $75,000. Um, so, um, But yeah, well, you're absolutely right. That's his the source of his downfall. But I wouldn't count him out yet. He's fallen before, and he's risen up again. So I wouldn't think that I wouldn't assume that he's not going to come back. Anyway, thank you. Anne Marie, always very good to see you, Anne Marie. Our musical expert, our distinguished musical performer, who's extraordinarily enough has played in some of the finest orchestras in the world. Worked with some of the outstanding conductors and composers, and it's an amazing track record of working with so many eminent musicians. And so we're very fortunate um, to have her here, and very fortunate to enjoy her her really insightful musical commentary on our pages. But Anne Marie yesterday posed a very interesting question, which I didn't really get a chance to answer, um, about the, um, uh, the issue of Ukraine and Germany's claim, um, that that Ukraine was behind the destruction of Nord Stream. So we had the Seymour Hersh article, which said, and which according to common sense would say, yeah, who was behind it? The United States. It's a huge operation. You're just destroying these gas pipelines. The United States was behind it with some assistance from Norway. Um, and but that's too embarrassing. So an alternative theory was put forward, whereby Ukraine was really behind this attack on Nord Stream, and but you couldn't even take that too far, because um, then you'd have to say that the Ukraine government, the government that Europeans are asked to sacrifice everything for, their livelihoods, the standard of living, even their own security, um, they have to sacrifice it for a government that destroys German property and destroys, Germany's um, source of cheap energy. So, what do you have to say? Well, then you say, well, okay, it wasn't Zelensky. Zelensky wasn't really involved in this. It was somebody else. Somebody, rogue elements within the Ukraine government were involved in this, the destruction of Nord Stream. And then they thought, well, maybe it's not Zelensky, but Zaluzhny or some guy sitting in prison. And anyway, um, and then so they had to come up with this explanation that it was an act of sabotage by Ukraine, or at least by somebody, because otherwise, um, you know, the insurance companies would be on the hook. They would have to pay billions and billions and billions of dollars in compensation. So how do But of course, if it was done, it was a terrorist act destroying the pipelines, then the insurance companies are off the hook. So Chancellor Merz wants to keep that story going, and to ensure that that the insurance companies are safe from essentially bankruptcy. By paying out billions for this pipeline. Now, then the question was that the leader of the German the AfD, the leader in the Bundestag, this Weidel, said, and I played a little bit of that clip yesterday. So Weidel said in the Bundestag that when Weidel, becomes chancellor of Germany, she's going to make Ukraine pay for the damage that it had done. Not sure how where Germany was going to, where Ukraine was going to get this money, but nonetheless, she said was going to pay. And Anne Marie asked a very reasonable question. Well, what's the evidence for this? What's the evidence that Ukraine was really behind this this act of the greatest act of industrial terrorism ever? What's the evidence for it? And and I said, well, I haven't seen any terribly compelling evidence. We still don't really know who were the people uh, who were behind it, who organized this. How did they get all the material and so on. And so I haven't seen any plausible case. And I think then Anne Marie said, well, if there's no plausible case that Ukraine was behind this, then what does Alice Weidel mean that she's going to make Ukraine pay for this for this for the damage that Ukraine had caused? And that's really is a very good question. Why is then Weidel making this argument? I guess she's trying to embarrass Merz, Merz's policy by saying, "Hey, well, you're supporting this war in Ukraine, um, and it's Ukraine who destroyed this, our property, which we had invested money in. So, what are you doing to pursue the culprits?" And then she said, "Well, but however, will do it." And she gets some brownie points for that. So Germans will say, "Oh, well, we're going to have a truly nationalist government in power in Berlin with Alice Weidel, and she will pursue the Ukrainian government and demand that they pay, even though Ukraine doesn't have any money. Ukraine is a net recipient of billions and billions from others, so I don't know where Ukraine's going to get the money to um, pay compensation to Germany." I was just saying, well, why is she doing it? Well, she's just trying to, win some easy points. Weidel, like Merz, knows perfectly well Ukraine couldn't possibly have done this. There's no way Ukraine could have done something as technically as difficult, as complex, and as blowing up this massive gas pipeline under the sea. It's an enormous undertaking. And she knows what Ukraine couldn't have done it. 6 people in a yacht, with a hot babe among them. It could not be done. But Weidel, I think, is pretending to believe this because she's seen the newspaper reports as everybody else, and seen that these are wildly implausible stories that that Ukraine did this. So that becomes. I didn't have a chance to address Anne Marie's point. So thank you so much, Anne Marie, as always, for your generosity. And then Robert says, "You're exactly right. What remains so unclear is whether Epstein engineered his own role, shrewdly inserting himself into elite networks, or whether he was sponsored, cultivated, and protected to play that role." Well, that's a very good question. I don't know what the answer to that is. My own view is that he, I mean, it'll be interesting to know whether could there have been somebody sponsoring him. I just think he is someone who is a master grifter. Somebody who's always promoting himself, devotes all of his time to cultivating. That's his thing. He was cultivating important people. If you go back to Donald Trump before 2015, he was a little bit like that. He was this constant self-promoter. You couldn't pick up a newspaper any day, or turn on the telly without Trump being there. Whatever the matter, Trump is always there. Is always. Um, Now, Trump wasn't quite like Epstein because Trump was much more interested in sports celebrities, and I think Epstein didn't seem to be very interested in sport, um, and interested in, Trump was also interested in real estate and casinos and things like that. But he was always trying to promote himself, promote his products, and it was a relentless energy. I mean, he never stopped. And so Epstein has some of that. I mean, so he devotes almost all of his time writing these messages. You have to wonder, when did he have time to get any work done? He's all the time he's writing messages to people, organizing dinners and so on. So um, I think he was, my own view is that he was just inserting himself. And the way you insert yourself is you exaggerate your own importance. So you have to always suggest that so and so, this person, that person, you can get a meeting with this person, you're gonna, you know everybody, you have everyone's, home phone number on your Rolodex. So I think that's how he yeah, how he operated. But as always happens with those types of people, is that, well, when he got into trouble, then that was it. I mean, that no one was going to go out on a limb for him. When he was when no one had any further use for him, that was the end. Um, so by 2019, he'd pretty much used up all of his friends and connections, and when he was finally indicted and arrested, by then he'd lost everybody. No one really cared about him, and I think he knew at that moment that he was going to be in prison for the rest of his life. I mean, that was it. I mean, he wasn't ever going to get out. So not all of those rich famous people weren't going to help him. Uh, anyway, thank you so much, Robert. And then Cynthia goes on and says, "Isn't it odd to you that Epstein was hypersexual? Yet, well, I'm not sure he was. I don't think he. I mean, I'm going by what Ghislaine Maxwell said about him. I mean, she may not be telling the truth, but she seemed to suggest he really wasn't particularly sexual. I don't know. I mean, I think she said something like she only ever had sexual relations with him once, and in all the years they were together. So he even the sort of sexual activities that we kind of heard about. That's he was preoccupied with these massages. I don't know why, but that seemed to have been his thing. So getting these massages. I don't know. I don't know why. What that, but somehow that was his thing of getting massages, and that's what Ghislaine Maxwell arranged for him. But so I wouldn't have said he was he was hypersexual. I don't think that was it. I mean, uh, you know, if you can call massages hypersexual, that doesn't strike me as that. Anyway, yet has no confirmed offspring. No, he has no confirmed offspring, despite over 100 people claiming to be his in hopes of a share of his estates, none of which were ever verified. That leaves only a few possibilities. His sperm count was so low that he was effectively infertile. The sex he had with women rarely involved intercourse. All his women were on birth control, or any resulting pregnancies were aborted. But given his total disregard for life, the last one seems most likely. Possibly, my own view is, I mean, of those options that you put forward, I think the most likely is that the sex he had with women rarely involved intercourse. Because I'm just going by what Ghislaine Maxwell said. She said that that happened once, and then I think somebody else, one of the other women, said, "Oh, it happened once." So it doesn't sound like he was that's what he was into. That I mean, I kind of think, if you think, well, what's he into? I mean, leaving aside the massage, he is into cultivating rich, famous, and important people. It's a type. I mean, it's not such an unusual type. I mean, New York is full of them. I've known people like that in New York. That's all they live for, is to be around rich, famous, influential people. They're going lunch to lunch with them. I mean, having them over for dinner. Going on holiday with them. I mean, that's what he was into. I don't think he was into sex. Anyway, thank you as always, Cynthia. Let me go back. Where was I? Yes. And then, so Aristotle one, thank you so much, Aristotle one. And Aristotle says, you made an interesting point that the Democrats enacted a policy of mass immigration in 1965 in response to the near loss theft of the 1960 election. The cynicism involved would be remarkable. Do you have any sources to back up this claim? Well, I think you'd have to have the sources. I think you would have to then read some of the comments of the time and realize that just uh, you know there was a very good book that I posted on the Gaggle book club, America in Our Time, and it was written by Godfrey Hodgson. It was an English journalist. It was a very good book. It was written sometime in the mid 1970s, and he points out some of these issues, which was that. So I think you could still find, if you in the Gaggle just put in Godfrey Hodgson, America in Our Time, so it'll be somewhere on the Gaggle. It's already a while ago since I posted it, but it should still be on the board, and you can download the book. But I think he really pointed out that this that uh, the Democrats in the 1950s were beginning to realize that the glory days of the FDR coalition were gone. That somehow that whole blue collar vote was kind of moving towards the Republicans. And I mean, they saw what had happened, during the Eisenhower years. Eisenhower two comfortable victories, and then even after that, um, they were really forced to steal the 1960 election, and so then they had how do we resolve this problem? Well, let's have more immigrants, because that used to be our base. We had immigrants; they would vote for the Democrats, and I think that's what generated the the push for this enormous uh, change in America's demography, so that we are going to import our voters. And it was a very shrewd move, and it worked like a charm for the Democrats. And there's been and why they still are pushing that agenda, not because they care so much about immigrants, but they know this is our base. And that's why all the talk. Well, we'll do this with ICE. Oh, we'll have body cameras. We'll we'll have clear IDs and whatever. I mean, all these things, which may be reasonable reforms, but that's not the issue. The issue isn't whether they should have body cameras or not. The issue is nobody nobody should ever be deported from the United States. That everybody should remain here because that's that's our voting base. I mean, they don't even want murderers and rapists to be deported from the United States. That's our base. So nothing is ever going to persuade Democrats to support the deportation of even one person. Anyway, Aristotle says, defending the Warren Commission, surely it is important to see what the powers that be are doing, whether it is assassinating presidents or paying off politicians so that they bomb Iran for you. The only way of cleaning it up is to expose the dirt. Well, I mean, I don't think it's really time now to go into the Kennedy assassination. Whatever the shortcomings of the Warren Commission, no one has come up with a more plausible, better explanation than the one that we had in 1963. The murderer was, the assassin was Lee Harvey Oswald. We know a lot about him. We know a lot about his past. We know, everything that he did. We know his political motivations, and all the rest. It's just vague speculations. For which there's really no one's really come up with any plausible explanation. So, well, sometimes it's the CIA, sometimes it's the mafia. Sometimes it's organized crime. It's the military. These vague entities, but there's no one's really come up with any way of these these supposed general all embracing culprits, how they actually pulled this off, and how they managed this giant cover up, which would have included the president's own brother. I mean, that was never an explanation. I mean, why would the president's own brother be involved in this cover up? So, yeah, there are obvious problems with the Warren Commission, but it's still you've got to you can't just pick holes in the Warren Commission. You've got to come up with a plausible alternative hypothesis rather than just vague suggestions. Anyway, thank you so much, Aristotle. And then Vic Shakapopoulos says, "Dear George, considering the Epstein revelations, maybe we could have a film night inspired by the topic of secret societies, occultism, films like Eyes Wide Shut. We've had The Wicker Man. We haven't had Rosemary's Baby. That's not a bad idea. Let me write that down. That's a good idea. Let's see. Yeah. How did you phrase it? Let's see. You said secret societies, occultism. So, and then film Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah. Okay, Eyes Wide Shut. And the Wicker. Well, as I say, we've had the Wicker Man, but Rosemary's Baby we haven't had. Okay, that's a good idea. I like that idea. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for that. And then Dennis Misty says the BBC has become Fox News. Yep, well, that's true enough. And thanks you. And Anne Marie says there is this video, if it's not a fake, with Kushner and Witkoff, where the latter reveals that there was a plan for Gaza all along, already 2 years before the war started. If this is true, wouldn't it imply that in order to achieve these goals, an event like October 7th would be necessary? I think I know the video that you mean, and it is true that Kushner. I don't know about Witkoff, and I'm not sure Witkoff ever really gave the matter thought. Kushner, back in during Trump's term, that was his whole thing of economic development. And the great thing about economic development is that you kick out the people who can no longer afford to live there. And It's always been the case. I mean, they've always done this in New York, which is that supposedly, hey, you're going to build this new property, and you're going to offer, places to live for the people who are already living there. But in practical terms, it never happens because, of course, the people who are already living there are too poor, and they'll never be able to afford to live in these luxury condos. So you kind of pretend that you're going to offer them. Oh yeah, we're going to offer you luxury condos. We're going to build them. You're since you're already living here, you're going to be first in line for these luxury condos. But of course, they don't have any money. They can't afford these luxury condos. So it's a way of just kicking people out. And that's obviously the way Kushner was thinking, and that's probably how he sees this. It's going to be very difficult. I mean, we've talked about this before. Kicking out, you can kick a few people out, like in New York City, or wherever. Kicking out 2 million people, that's a huge undertaking. And so I'm not sure that they're going to pull this off. I think they'll try, but I think that's a project that's really very difficult. I think what they're doing now is the way they're kind of partitioning Gaza, and so thinking in terms of, well, any new investment will go to those areas that are under Israeli occupation. So they're not going to go into any of the areas where the IDF is not located. I think that's kind of the way they're thinking now. Whether they're going to be able to prevail, whether the Board of Peace will accept this, whether the Gaza technocratic government will accept it. But yeah, I mean, probably, with Kushner, yes, he would like to see you know, the Palestinians gone. I just think that this is a very, very difficult operation. That's 2 million people. They refuse to go. If they refuse to go, then it's it's hard to know what you do, other than you can launch a massive military operation. But they tried that. I mean, they've had 2 years from 2023 through to 2025 of driving out the Palestinian population from Gaza. They didn't succeed. So they didn't succeed. So, and even if Israel were to relaunch this their war, which I suppose they could, it's not at all clear that they'll be any more successful than they were from 2023 to 2025. I mean, the Palestinians will not leave Gaza. So you're going to have to use such massive force. This Israel isn't very good at that. I mean, Israel can bomb, Israel can send rockets. Israel isn't particularly good at going in, and engaging in the kind of hand-to-hand combat that you would need to do to achieve that. That's not their style. So I have my doubts that whole ethnically cleansing Gaza is really a feasible project. I mean, there are lots of disgusting characters in Israel who talk along those lines, but they don't know how to do it. Smotrich and a Ben Gvir, they don't know how to do something like that. Anyway, Anne-Marie then goes on. How could Israel have a justification to totally destroying Gaza and cleansing the West Bank and achieving their long-cherished goal of Greater Israel without such an event? In other words, couldn't it be that the 7th October was a coup comparable to 9/11, also considering all the many conspicuous inconsistencies? Well, it's possible. I haven't seen. I haven't seen evidence that was, um, preordained, that it was planned beforehand, that Netanyahu was in on it. Um, But if that was the plan, um, then you'd have to say they haven't succeeded. That plan has failed. Yes, they've killed 100,000, maybe more than 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza. Okay, that comes to 5% of the population of Gaza. What does that tell you? That means 95% of the population of Gaza is still alive and is still in Gaza. So if the goal was to drive, to ethnically cleanse once and for all, to have zero Palestinians in Gaza and to use that October the 7th to do that, then that project has failed. However horrific Israel's actions and everything that it has done since October the 7th, 95% of Gaza's population is still there. I mean, killing 5% is of course horrific enough. But if 95% are there, then what's your plan to get rid of this 95%? How are you going to get rid of them? And now it's more difficult because now you've got the Board of Peace. Now you've got all these humanitarian organizations. So you'd have to start the whole thing up all over again. Um, and and as I say, even if you start the whole thing up, even if you do it in a more brutal way than what you did from 2023 to 2025, it's still not clear how you can get rid of 95% of the population, and particularly when all the neighboring countries have said, we're not going to take part in this, we're not going to aid and abet the removal of the Palestinian population from Gaza. So if that was the plan, the Netanyahu plan to use October the 7th, they were in on it or whatever, it was planned and executed by Netanyahu and the rest, then that plan has failed. And now it's further away than ever because now they've got other countries involved. You've got Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. They're all involved in this with the Board of Peace and this technocratic government that's in Gaza. So it's much more difficult now to accomplish than it would have been in October the 7th. So that would have been the opportunity to do it if you're going to do it, if you're going to ethnically cleanse Gaza. But that it hasn't worked. They have not accomplished that goal. Um, so anyway, thank you so much, Anne Marie. That's really interesting. There's a lot of food for thought there. Anyway, my time is up, well up, and so thank you very much, everybody who joined us. Thank you so much for all of your comments and questions and observations. Please watch the Monday night screening. For our Monday night at the movies, we have Double Indemnity, one of the greatest of all the film noirs, one of the darkest of all the film noirs. Watch the film, enjoy Cynthia's very learned and very incisive commentary. Listen to the music that we post on the Gaggle Music Club. Enjoy Anne Marie's always intriguing and acute observations about the playing of these pieces of music, and everybody who's on YouTube, everybody who's on X, please join our community. As you can see, we have a very high level of intellectual and artistic accomplishment here at this community. So please join, take part, and we will be back on Thursday at the same time. So look forward to seeing you then. Thank you again, everyone who contributed to the tip jar. The dogs, they'll have their say, but I'm grateful on their behalf, even if they don't express their gratitude. So thank you. See you Thursday. All the best. Good night. Bye bye.